not going to believe that.
I'll start.
Yeah.
So you answered a lot of my questions in your introduction, so thank you very much. I'll give you two to choose from, and then you can take it from there. So how do you see the challenges of Act 10 in the next 5 years for Shorewood, based on what you know, and kind of managing that politically and socially and financially? And then how do you, when you're working and collaborating, what's your approach to saying, oh, I was wrong, I'm sorry, but I'm still in charge? So how do you balance? What's your style of that? So two very different questions.
Yeah,
you can pick whichever.
I like them both.
You can answer both.
So, okay. So in terms of Act 10, so I think the best evidence of the way I will approach it here is, you know, what I've done in Kohler. It was a surprise to everybody, right? Well, I shouldn't say that. Probably the people that were planning it weren't surprised by it. I certainly was surprised by it. And what I experienced in Kohler is, first of all, Kohler is probably the most progressive little community in Sheboygan County, which is probably the most conservative county in the state. All right, so very interesting dynamic to have landed within. And my first sense of how this was going to play out was that there's no way I'm going to be able to extend a contract. There's no way, it just politically, the kind of pressure in that area would draw so much attention that it just wouldn't happen. But then I started to really pay attention to what was happening to my teachers. I'm also the high school principal, so I spent a lot of time in the hallways with the kids, with the teachers, in classrooms, all the things a good principal takes on. And just watching as anxiety was building, the kind of conversations were shifting. I felt that teachers were turning more to just the upheaval and not paying enough attention to quality learning. Even though they were still doing their jobs and they were just profoundly professional, it wasn't the same kind of conversation or energy focused on learning. So I thought, I have to start to really educate the board about what's happening and this level of anxiety that I'm seeing, and we're gonna have to do an extension of the contract here and engage teachers in what is that gonna look like. Because we had to get through this fairly quickly, and having to move directly into a handbook versus what is familiar, it just wasn't enough time. And so I've done a great deal of change management, all of those small schools and opening and closing schools, and I've learned a lot of lessons. And one of the lessons that I've learned that I had to pay attention to in Kohler, that it's not always the change of what you're trying to turn into, but it's the process. It's the transition of getting there that can be very hard for people. And so I really made the pitch that we need time to do this thoughtfully. We need time to engage teachers in the conversation. We need at least a year to extend the contract. And we worked with the teachers. We worked out a way to manage the fiscal impact of what was coming. The teachers, I think, were more gracious than I had anticipated, but it was also that they were engaged. They were part of the process then. It wasn't something that was being done to them. It was being something that we were working through together. So it was really a whole bunch of meetings that led to the extension of the contract, and then we've used that very same kind of process of collaborating. You know, the official language is a little different, but as we've shaped the handbook. So we launched a design team of teachers to build the handbook, and we're still working to build the compensation system so that they have a great deal of input. The first idea of our compensation system, after we floated it in a couple different places, and they took it to some colleagues in other districts, I took it to other superintendents, and we both came back to the meeting and went, this isn't such a good idea, is it? So we had to accept that. Okay, we made a mistake in our first idea about the way we're going to figure out how to pay teachers going forward. And so that's kind of one of those moments of how do you say, ooh, I think we got it wrong, and still move forward as a leader. And so some of those moments is simply being honest is part of it. You know, I make mistakes. I make lots of them, and I'm always upfront with my board. And you know, I try never to surprise the board, but when there is something coming that was my mistake, I'm on the phone right away saying, okay, this is not going to look good, and it's my fault, and this is what happened, and here's how I think we go forward. The other part of it is, in moments like that, leaders have to also set direction. And we are going to have a compensation system in Kohler that people can understand and is fair and equitable and live with. So we have to stay focused on the direction. But I think the responding to Act 10 going forward is a lot of collaboration. It takes a lot of time to engage people, to first build the background knowledge, build the understanding, get ideas on the table, asking people to really focus on, okay, what's in the best interest of everybody, and ultimately how do we serve kids within the adult interest, because that is why we're all here, right? The enterprise is learning. And so it's that kind of continuous conversation. And then in terms of the budget, it's going to be continue to look at what are the other things we can leverage, both other resources outside the district, or are there things we can learn to do differently inside the district that allow us to put money in the most important place, which is the classroom. And that's always how I've made decisions. When there's a decision where I can ask the question, okay, so what option provides the best benefit to young people? And I say, well, as teachers, tell me, which of these two options provides the best benefit to young people? And I hear, well, this one. We made our decision. I don't really need to say that's what it is. So I'll often go to that as what's the best benefit for young people, and we move forward from there. So did I hit them both?
You did.
Okay.
And I have an appointment, so I'm going to leave, but I have all my questions even. So
Okay, all right.
You guys carry on from here.
If only every
What's that?
question were that.
No, I do, but I just wanted to get to my
Other questions people have.
I guess.
Go ahead, Ellen.
Sure, I have a couple.
And I'm going to ask a favor, if you could speak loudly.
Oh, sure.
This is being videotaped too, so.
Oh,
we
I
gotta
can
make
always
sure.
speak loudly. Not a problem. My name's Ellen Ekman. So I'm going to ask, I have been sort of toyed with, I'm going to take her model, Ann's model, and ask two questions. One is, talk a little bit about how you form relations. I should preface this so it's not like a trick question. I'm a village board trustee, and I'm also a professor at Marquette University. So just so that you have a context and don't go off. It would be very nice if I tried to trick you. How do you foster relationships? I mean, you worked in a small community. Kohler isn't that much, I don't know the population of the square mileage. How do you foster relationships, or how did you, or what do you know about Shorewood as a village? You know, it's an old village. There's a special word for villages that are first out of the city and has some immense issues around development and moving forward and understanding things like, and it's really important for sort of people understanding what development looks like in an older village. So that's one question. So as you're thinking about that one. The second one is, what's the most recent book you've read? This is the professor question. That has helped you form your concepts about leadership.
So I'll do that one. The one I'm reading right now is Leadership on the Line, but that's related to my dissertation. So it's kind of leading in moments of struggle, and how do you still stand in moments of struggle and not have either personal or organizational challenges sort of take you off mission. But my research area is the influence of post-traumatic growth on leadership. So the opposite of post-traumatic stress disorder, there's research around how people grow as a result of trauma. And so I'm interested in leaders who have experienced trauma while in a leadership role, and they actually end up growing and becoming more successful as leaders. Okay, so Leadership on the Line is the one a lot of my reading right now. I've also been reading Daniel Pink. And he just came out with a very short piece of kind of 16 things that, and so one that really threw me was don't try to find your purpose, right? And answer the question why. Is really what some of his thinking right now. So that one. Okay. So going back in terms of developing relationships and understanding a village, having transitioned successfully from large urban to a village of 2,000. So I have some skills that I think have been very helpful in that. Changing districts a couple times, you always start with relationships. And so what I did in Kohler is I very intentionally launched a number of meetings with the community. And so the question we posed, and we used kind of open space. and a lot of the big chart paper and people forming small groups and then changing groups. And I simply asked the question, what do I need to know about Kohler to be successful in my first year? And then somebody could say, well, I think you should know about the relationship between the school and the village. Okay, anybody that wants to talk about that and put some notes down for me, you head off to that table. Okay, somebody else. Well, you should really know that we have a mess in technology and we're way behind. Okay, who wants to talk about technology in school? And so I think we had about 8 groups going. And then we would change groups. We'd let that group go for about 10, 12 minutes, and then you say, okay, now the person that launched that stays put. If you're curious about one of the other ones, move. And the person there would then explain, well, this is what we just talked about, and you can add to that. It was a great way for me to gather lots of information and have a lot of people engage right away with me in the beginning weeks. It also became the foundation for what a few months ago is now the strategic plan. So it was it served 2 purposes: start to build relationships, but also all of that information gathering and data gathering you want to do to develop an effective strategic plan. Then I did meetings with teachers. These would be smaller groups. These are 8 to 10. They were all lunch meetings. And then we had conversations about less, more, start, stop. So what should we be doing less of from a teacher perspective? What should we be doing more of? What should we be starting? What should we be stopping? And the stop part of it gets to be very interesting. So what are the kinds of things we can let go of based on where we are? So that began the relationship development with teachers. Well, this is going on. I also very intentionally went and scheduled a meeting with each superintendent in the area. So I personally went and introduced myself. And I also introduced myself that way to the UNISERV director, so the director of the teachers' unions in that area. That one meeting probably paid off more than almost all the others. And when I left that meeting, he said, and I don't forget how many years, for all the years he had been there, he said he had never had a superintendent come out and personally introduce himself. And that surprised me. I was like, it just seemed like such a natural thing to do in the role. That's not what superintendents should be doing. So then also the similar kind of things with the village president, the village board, and a lot of those people were involved in these community engagement activities. But being intentional about identifying and introducing myself. Then the other thing I paid attention to were former board members. So board members, school board members. So a gentleman that had been very influential that was no longer on the board, but had a lot of background knowledge of the system and the relationship with the village. So, and now he is, I call him one of my canaries in the coal mine, so I look to develop those kind of relationships quickly. So if something's going wrong, I've built some trust and somebody will pick up the phone and say, Marty, are you aware that? I'm like, oh, thank you. I wasn't, and now I know which 3 people to call to kind of work through that. So those have been very effective strategies for me, and I would bring those here. In terms of what I understand about Shorewood, it's similar and in many ways different than Kohler. So a village structure that is a long tradition that people are very proud of. It's geographically quite a bit smaller than Kohler. So the 1 1/4 square miles in Shorewood, there's a lot of undeveloped space in Kohler, but Kohler's 2,000 people. The school system is 600. Okay, so that gives you kind of the comparison a little bit. Median income in Kohler is a little bit higher than Shorewood, but they're both affluent communities. And I've already described a little bit. Kohler's a little more progressive in a conservative area, but there's a lot of conservative influence. Shorewood's much more progressive, right? Not monolithic. No community ever is, but that's part of the dynamic of Shorewood, and that's part of what attracts me to it. Because I'm trying not to go into the areas that are on the back of the sheet.
I think we'd have to stop you.
Well, I'm allowed to talk about them. So it attracts me to be in a place where people are thinking progressively, and I'll just leave it there.